and I'm getting to them myself. If you look at the one in red, that documents is 1+1 scenario. What you'll see are a number of boxes where you'll just see numbers without any highlighting. Then you'll see numbers in red, and then you'll see numbers in yellow. Okay, let's get to it. Yeah. Go ahead. Okay. Give us a second to pull it up. Go to board meeting. Okay, sorry for that little delay. The items in yellow are the effort that we're making with the D schools, where the ratio was 23-1 last year, and we're proposing those D schools to go to 20-1. The numbers in red essentially reflect the 1+1 ratio, and simply put, what that means is if you had, to make it easy to understand, you had, let's say you had 3 sections of 20 students each and your ratio was 20-1. You would add a new teacher once you added an additional 4th student, 1 student per section plus 1. So what you're doing is you're making a decision to expend the cost of an additional teacher across 4 teachers now for 64 students. So your ratio goes to what's 16 students per class. All right? And everything works that way. So whether there's 9 sections or 8 sections or 2 sections or 1. So on that basis, if we follow this scenario, and we've had a lot of discussions, including the most recent one, which ended about 2:30, where we were discussing various scenarios to present to you. For instance, an example is we had a situation last year where we had an alternative program, and again, I'll let either Dr. Aguilar or Joe or Annette speak to that, where we're now going to fold those alternative students back into the classrooms or into another mechanism. On that basis, it slightly changes the total number of teachers you need because you're not going to have a special set of teachers for alternative. The net of it is, if you go to 1+1, you will wind up having to reduce about 40 classroom teachers based upon the current staffing numbers in the schools. By going to a 2+1 scenario, which will go to the next table, it would be around 40 teachers, and I'm going to say you'd probably be 42 or 43 because of the recent changes we made. If you go to the proposed scenario of 2+1, then the numbers that we'd like to present and the staffing scenario procedures we'd like to present, which we'll do immediately after this, will mean that, let's go back to the example of 3 sections at 20 students. If you went to a 2+1 scenario, instead of an additional 4 students, you would add 1 student for each section. So it would be an addition of 7 students. When you got to that 7th student, you would then add an additional teacher. So the net difference between 1+1 and 2+1 in that example is by adding those 3 additional students, you're making a decision to add an additional teacher for 7 students rather than 4. And we're presenting it that way because if one of the handouts we have will also show you currently what the overall ratios of students to teachers are, and there aren't going to be very many situations where we'll have to get into those additions because the ratios are ranging in the 20-to-1 ratio in K to 4. And we'll show you that information as well. So while I understand that 7 students across 3 sections may be a little bit more of a challenge than 4 students across 3 sections, we're also wanting you to fully understand the significance of the financial decision you're making when we're talking about a difference of 3 students.
Mr. Hidalgo?
Mr. Loninger, if you don't mind, please explain, if I understood you correctly, if we do nothing and we basically stay at the ratio, 1 plus 1 extra student, you mentioned that it would be a net effect of 40 positions.
That's correct.
Can you explain that to me? If we do nothing and we cut 40 positions, then that essentially means that we had too many positions on the book. So can you explain to me how that happened?
Well, you can have enrollment changes. You can have around 4 years.
And numbers of HR and resources, myself, students.
You had an anomalous year where the number went down. Instead of an additional 1,000 students, the number went down by 1,000.
So that's okay. So now we're getting somewhere as far as for what I think my question has been all along. The reason behind this, that's probably what you're saying is the main reason, the expectation, anticipation of those students coming back from charter schools to our school system. My question, did we hire those teachers before the school year started, or was it kind of spread out? I mean, the chances of 1,000 students coming back into the school system all at one time are pretty slim to none. And I'm just trying to figure out, when did we hire these teachers? And, we hired 40 teachers expecting to have a surge of 1,000 students. I mean, that's...
The schools were staffed on the 1+ model this past 15-16 year, last summer. And based on the projected enrollments, we'd collaborate and see how large that class got with the additional students, and then we'd make a recommendation to the superintendent as to should we go ahead and fill another spot, or hire another teacher or not. That's where we kind of got into the 2+1 rule. Because of the fiscal situation of the parish and the state, we wanted to make prudent decisions in terms of staffing. And when you add another teacher when you're just 1 student over, well, a class can potentially go from 25, 30 kids to 15. And while that's very nice, nobody's complaining about that, there's a cost to the district on that. So going into the budget year this year, we were looking at that, and 2+1 with the option for the superintendent to listen to the concerns of any principal in terms of staffing allows us to make more fiscally prudent decisions, but still staff the schools and still give the superintendent the flexibility to make decisions that directly help the kids that need it the most.
So I understand the impact, I guess, unless I'm missing something here, unless maybe we lost 1,000 students this year, and that hasn't been said yet. But my thing is, making sound financial decisions is great, but according to the information given now, we had 40 more teachers than we needed to have. or than that we should have had. And so unless we lost 1,000 students, we didn't make good financial decisions whether we use 1+1 or 2+1.
When you
Mr. Hidalgo, so let me take a shot at this because I think we're focusing on the wrong metric here. When you use the 1+1, you end up adding teachers very quickly after school starts. There were 37 additional teachers that were hired through appeals. So after staffing, and they probably staffed at the correct number, we added 37 additional teachers into the system. So literally, you were over 37 teachers, over and above what the staffing number dictated. So what's happening is you're adding teachers very quickly, and every time you add a teacher, the metric is $67,000 for that teacher. The 2+1 will slow down the number of additional teachers that need to be added. It's a savings to the board of about $1 million simply by slowing down the addition of extra teachers after staffing. Today, after we get through this introduction, we're going to show you the staffing numbers for each of our schools for next year based on their enrollment count and show you that we're really not even approaching the pupil-teacher ratio in many cases. So going to 2+1 simply slows down the anticipated number of appeal teachers that we'll need. For example, last year we hired 37 extra teachers. In next year's budget, we're already thinking that we'll set the number of appeal teachers at 25 rather than 37 because we don't expect that we'll hire those teachers that quickly. So I think that's where we're trying to get is a little bit more stability in the staffing numbers. And we have tweaked the formula so much so we think we're going to have fewer appeals. There were one or two variables where the formula didn't calculate for how many alternative ed students were on middle school campuses. So each middle school last year came back and needed an extra teacher because of their alternative students. We've adjusted the schedule so that they're getting that extra teacher through staffing. They won't have to come back through appeals.
Go ahead, Joe.
Select.
Dr. Aguilar, had we had approved what 16 to 18 teachers to be granted on appeals last year, and
I think initially it was 14.
14, and it became 37.
right. So saying 25 is that maybe being a little aggressive or
Actually, Mr. Lochley, 25 is a good cushion for the budget as well as a safety net for in cases where we need extra teachers. If we don't need these positions, it's money saved in the budget, which would be a good thing. So 25 is just a good, safe number of appeals. I'm hopeful that we don't need to budget that many in actuality.
what would be your time frame for granting? When would school starts? Let's say August 18th. How long in the school are we going to go before we start granting appeals?
Just as soon as the principal makes a request to Joe and Human Resources will get together. We validate the number of kids in place. We'll grant an appeal.
Okay, so I mean,
It happens very quickly. It happens in the first couple of days through the first couple of weeks of school.
so it wouldn't be a little more prudent to wait 2 or 3 weeks and see what happens with enrollment instead of jumping on it so fast, and then you have this teacher hired, and then you have to do something with this teacher.
Well, and that's why when the request comes in, HR and myself, we sit down and look at it immediately. We want actual rosters of students. We talk to the principal. The first couple weeks, they trickle in for a little while. Historically, people used to think Labor Day was the big cutoff, but by Labor Day, we're well set, and that's 3 weeks into it, 2 weeks into it, the enrollments are pretty stable.
And from a state point of view, last year the board changed the date that we would use for staffing to October 1st. by October 1st, we get the information from the state that says what are the MFP dollars that will follow the changes in enrollment. So certainly no later than October, we have sound numbers saying here are the dollars that will back up the students that have enrolled.
Mr. Centini?
I'm really excited we're having this conversation. Because I think it gets to the heart of the matter where we have many of our classrooms are well under that that staffing ratio. And I think the discrepancy of the conversation we're actually having is related to, I guess, standard deviations, or what is the acceptable maximum number of students in a classroom. So my question is, with the appeal process, is when you hit the seventh student or the fourth student or whatever the number is that an automatic? Like they file their appeal and it gets rubber stamped?
If they are 2+1, yes, sir, for all practical purposes, we're going to grant that additional teacher.
And under what circumstances do we grant appeals that are not over that number?
You get schools, you get a small high school. Those small high schools still need to offer those specialty singleton courses, and those courses at a small school aren't going to have 29 or 30 students in there. So in a school with a lot of special programs in a small school, the superintendent would probably want to assist them if possible.
So a very nice segue into my next question. When I was looking at the roster or the student counts per teacher per course that you guys gave me, one of the things I noticed, and I mean it's obvious, easy to figure out why, the middle schools and high schools have a tremendous variance in the number of students per classroom, and not so much at the elementary schools.
Yes, sir.
Because they don't change classes, right? Okay. So should we start to think about staffing high schools and middle schools in a different manner to better accommodate that? You're a former high school principal. Tell me what you think.
It actually works better for the high schools. The middle schools are the trick because in a lot of respects, we count those kids and allocate them to a teacher from point of view of an elementary situation.
Like a homeroom?
Yes, sir. It's self-contained by subject area, but they're actually taking departmentalized courses. So middle school, I've been working with Mr. Veed and HR all winter in terms of tweaking that model for the process for allocating teachers. Mr. Hebert, Ms. Aloysiu, we've all got experience in that. A straight elementary school is very straightforward. An immersion school, Ms. Samick could tell you, is a little trickier because you got to tease out those immersion students. A traditional middle school, it's a little more of a challenge because, like I said, we kind of look at those kids as elementary students in terms of the calculation, but they're in a departmentalized program with various electives. High school, in terms of the allocation, is probably easiest, but that requires the most skill on the principal's part to allocate his resources to best suit the kids.
So may I continue? Sure, okay. Sure. So to take this one step further, would it be better, since we're really only having the conversation about or discussing the maximum acceptable, that's what y'all call it, the max, acceptable
range, yes, sir.
What is the state limit? I know that's prescribed in law or by Bessie policy, one of the two. What's the state limit for regular education classes?
Bulletin 741, middle school 33 to 1. When our discussions with superintendent, we set that acceptable maximum at 29, and Dr. Aguilar had suggested that if we go over 29, let's look at hiring another teacher, because there's a certain point where you get too many kids in a classroom, you can't even get enough kids in a classroom, and it become ineffective. So we don't want to go over 29 in a core class. That wouldn't include band or PE, those types of classes, but in a core class in high school, we wouldn't want that to go over 29. Now, again, some of that falls on the principal in decision making, and they make that decision. Is it acceptable for me to have 30 honors juniors in a class as opposed to 25 regular juniors in a class, it's a whole lot easier to manage that class of 30 honors students, and most teachers would probably prefer 30 honors kids as opposed to 20 or 25 regular students. So the principal, I guess what I'm saying, has to make some decisions in terms of what his students are requesting and the certified teachers that he has available.
Okay. So would it possibly make more sense if we went down on the ratio itself and simply tweak the acceptable maximum so that the superintendent has the flexibility to allocate teachers to schools? Because it sounds like that's the issue, is that we don't have the flexibility we need to, I guess, allocate on the fly when enrollment numbers don't turn out to be what we expect them to be. And that's how we fall into the trap with the 37 or 40 teachers,
Well,
right?
I guess staff would say that the process is actually the calculation. What happens is once staffing allocation and pupil teacher ratio is approved, HR calls in every principal. We'll share the projected numbers with them. We'll share they have access to last year's numbers. A solid principal, a good principal, they're already going to know what their past enrollment was, what their current enrollment is. You average the two, you divide by the pupil teacher ratio. A principal knows where they're at, but we still call in every principal. We sit with them. We say, here's our numbers. What are your numbers? We verify the number of teachers in the count. And in all honesty, most of them work pretty good. Mr. Veed and myself sat this last couple weeks, and we have given, in terms of the allocation for middle school teachers, every time we could benefit the middle schools and add a teacher, we did. So we would roll up if it was if the calculation was you need 2.2 teachers, we said give them 3. And so we always ruled in favor of adding staff to the middle school because, again, that's the trickiest group. The other thing we did is in the past we've discounted on a percentage basis gifted kids, especially alternative kids at the middle school level. We're not even discounting them. We're giving, so instead, if you had 30 alternative kids, we'd only count 15. Well, now we're counting 30 middle school kids, and so you're getting full credit for that student because HR does not include the alternative teacher in the teacher allocation. So at the middle school, the alternative teacher is not included in the teacher's allocation. If you have an elementary teacher that teaches, like the schools that have 5 through 8, if there's an elementary teacher on that campus teaching PE, band, chorus, French, special ed, we don't count that against their allocation. ESL, we don't count against their allocation. So the past couple weeks, every benefit we could give to the middle schools, we've done that. And we're confident in the process and the equation when we sit down with all the principals. And then when a principal says they disagree or don't disagree, we've got forms, they can complete it. We really can have most of the staffing done before school starts. We want the staffing done before school starts so we can get the best teachers. But you get another subdivision to add, or you get, for whatever reason it happens, you get a small cohort of kids come in. You can kind of look at the bubbles over the years. I can remember several years ago, Youngsville had an extremely small group. And I called the former principal. I said, what's up with the number? He said, I can't tell you. It was a small group in 6th grade, a small group in 7th grade, a small group in 8th grade. It was just a blip in the data. So using the averages, one of the other things that HR has done, we are now using the October 1 counts, the averages from the October 1 counts. Myself as a former principal, Miss Aloisio, in the past we used a February 1 count. Well, I understand why they did that. They could tighten up on staffing. Even though those kids may be leaving the system, I've still got to have a seat for them in October. And after several years of begging for assistance, HR has started using the October 1 count. So we're getting a lot better equation in the calculations that we can sit with the principals. We share our data with the principals share their data, And we have good conversations about what's necessary and not necessary.
Sure.
So I was still a little unclear on the 37 extra teachers as well. We're saying that enough, just to use the 1+1, enough fourth students showed up parish-wide. Because, you know, if they showed up at one school, it'd be pretty easy, right? But
Yep.
so
And you can look at, can I get in there for a second?
Uh-huh.
You have to look at the number of classrooms and the number of sections. Another thing that created a difference in staffing was, in the document that you're looking at, the data points. That document never used to exist until 2 years ago. It was a pretty mysterious process behind closed doors amongst 2 or 3 people, where an approval would be made for what you call an appeal. Our principals are pretty sound administrators and understand numbers, so we put this document together so we could clearly define how we were going to proceed. And in that process, for instance, the issue of choosing February 1 over, or October 1 over February 1. I can still remember the principal at Austin coming to me and say, every year you cut me in February, and in October I need to hire an additional teacher and I can't find them. Well, that didn't make any sense. And when you hear that from 5 or 6 principals, so well, why don't we go to October 1? Well, going to an October 1 number, when the numbers are higher and then they go down in February, that creates more of an issue for Mr. Guidry than it does for the school, because we have to figure out where the money's coming from. So that's one item. The second thing that created some differences is the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grades, or the middle schools, were counted in aggregate like the high schools were. Miss Aloisio was pretty forceful in a meeting. She said, look, my 5th grade stay together, my 6th grade stay together, my 7th grade stay together, which is kind of what Joe is saying. So why don't you count them separately? Well, that creates a difference, because you're taking the same specific things that you're doing down in K-4 or K-5, and you're applying them in the way the world really works. That created some slight differences in terms of anticipated staffing needs. So what you have is you have a good sound procedure here, so everyone understands what it is. And then if you want to talk about it, it's not conjecture, it's saying, if I change X, what happens to Y? And this kind of conversation has probably never taken place before in this boardroom. So.
Mr. Latchley, you had a question?
I just wanted to ask the impossible question. What do we think, how many students do we think we'll gain in this school system because of the downturn from the economy? I mean, are we expecting, private school students to now come to our public schools because of the downturn in the economy? I mean, do you have any numbers that can go back to 08 and 09 and show did the enrollment spike because of the downturn in the economy, or are we expecting to stay the same?
Maybe Dr. Aguilar can help you better. I can't give you that number. The feeling from the principals is typically when the economy really slides that they're going to pick up students from the private schools. But I couldn't give you a number. I could tell you maybe 08, 09, Como maybe picked up an extra 25 kids maybe. I mean, I'm just kind of guessing.
That's why I say it's an impossible question, but I think we have to prepare for it because I think it's going to happen.
Mr. Hidalgo, we recruited this year aggressively in the months of July. August we recruited, and we tracked about 150 students coming to us from charter schools. So we know we can attract charter school students. We're going to go out and look for homeschool students to come back into the public school setting, and anybody else that wants to get into our schools because of the quality of our programs. We're going to try to sell our product to the public, and listen, every child we get back to us financially helps us hire that additional teacher. So we're going to work hard to fill our classes. And the nice thing about the formula is there's enough extra teachers budgeted, assuming you approve this, that we'll be able to react quickly to fill those classes.
Dr. Aguilar, I have just a general question as it relates to appeals. There's only one appeal. An appeal is an appeal. I mean, it's comes from a principal who wants another teacher. Would that be a good definition of an appeal?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So some of you, correct me if I'm wrong, some appeals are kind of automatic. I mean, if you have whether you have the 2+1 or the 1+1,
They would
once that number gets there, you're going to get that.
They would essentially be automatic.
automatic.
There are other situations where, in the case of a small high school, and you get to the end of the master schedule building process, and you've got several more classes, but you don't have a teacher to fill these single classes, we would consider giving that high school or that middle school an additional teacher to fulfill their master schedule. Those are the ones that we have to study and evaluate and determine that there is a academic reason why we need that teacher.
Mr. Guidry?
Typically, we've defined appeal as a position that differs from the board's policy.
Right.
So when it's tied to enrollment, when they get to the +2+1 or the +1+1, and they get that additional teacher, that doesn't count as an appeal. That's just following board policy. What an appeal is something that's a little bit that differs from the board policy. It may not be 25-1. It may be 23-1 for whatever reason they're basing their appeal on. So I just wanted to mention that to clarify.
Question. I mean, if I'm a teacher and I have under the allocated amount of students, let's say that I could have as many as 25, and I have 23. But I go up to my supervisor and I say, listen, I have 23 students in my classroom, but I've got some that have these impediments or whatever it is. I need fewer students, or I need to split up my class, or something like that. That would be an appeal having nothing to do with numbers in terms of the
Yes,
addition.
sir. Yeah,
That's why I was trying to differentiate between.
And I want you to know, I have 11 years of experience making decisions about hiring additional teachers or paraprofessionals as needed, depending on the educational circumstances.
That was my question. Thank you. Yeah, Dr. Shetson?
I want to respond to Mr. Latchley. MFP money, once that October deadline passes, those charter schools, when they can keep the money and they've got a couple of bad kids, they tend to kick those kids out. Then we get those kids as well. And kind of proactively, and I'm just looking at it from a small sect, we had 15 girls on Paul Bro's basketball team for the girls, and 2 of them were from private school. That was parents kind of foreseeing the future, and one of them has subsequently lost their job. So that's 15. That's 2 out of 15. So I'm thinking, I get calls all the time asking folks to refer them to HR that, hey, look, I lost my job. I'll take anything. So I tend to think that we will see a spike. And for Tommy, a specific situation of an appeal would be like Northside doesn't have physics. So specifically, if a principal wants to approach that for clearinghouse purposes or just in general, that, hey, I would like a physics teacher. Maybe we don't have that amount of kids to satisfy that specific number, then they would appeal for that. Yeah.
Thank you. That really helps answer my question. Any other questions? Mr. Leininger or Joe, proceed.
So the document that Mr. Leininger just passed out to you comes from data that the board requested back early in March 6th, I believe, where we listed all the teachers, their school assignment, how many kids they had. We then had technology and MIS tease out those kids. And so what you're looking at is, if you look at English grade, first grade through 9th grade, English language arts at 20-1, there was district-wide, this is a district picture, 111 sections, 2,252 kids. If you divide those two numbers, sections and students, you get a 20-to-1 ratio. So throughout the district, and high schools are always a little different, but throughout the district, we are under the pupil-teacher ratio. And again, part of that is because we don't count the ESL kids, the gifted kids, the special ed kids. The alternative kids are now counted at a full count. And so we really are, throughout the district, we are lower than the teacher-pupil ratio. We did not do 10th, 11th, and 12th because there is so many variations and options in terms of scheduling.
Mrs. Centini?
Do either of you know, or whoever prepared this report, what the least populated section for each of those grades, and what the most populated section for each of those grades? I'm sorry?
As in schools, you're asking?
I'm saying like grade 1 ELA. What is the smallest class we have?
I'd have to go through the data. If you really wanted to find the smallest class, you could probably find an elementary school out there with an ED special ed student.
No, I'm not talking about special ed.
So regular ed, it would be
Special ed classes included in this number?
No, that's
Oh,
what I
okay.
said.
Okay.
Uh,
I mean, of this number right here, right? What is the minimum?
maybe, without looking, sir, 15. You might find one 14. That would be an exception. Doosan has a 13, Miss Thibodeau's. But
Come on up, man. Come on up.
Yeah.
Some of the schools, hi, good afternoon. Some of the schools have different ratios due to staffing, like the emerging schools have a different ratio, so they're at 20-to-1. So if they have 24 first graders, which goes over the 20-to-1 by the +2, right, they would have 2 classes with 12. Okay, or if they have 26, so that's how they get that lower number. It's the same thing throughout the district. It's just different ratios. I'll show you later, but they're just different ratios. So yes, some of them are smaller, but it has to do with that, and it's 2. Once they go 2 over and then that +1, it makes the class look smaller.
Why do immersion classes have a lower ratio?
Probably because they don't have a smaller ratio. It's the number of children. Is that correct, Ms. Samick?
The immersion schools have the same ratio as the K-5 funding, so I think maybe Kathy was alluding to emerging schools, which were proposing.
Oh, emerging.
The emerging,
schools.
not immersion.
I thought you said immersion.
No,
Okay.
no, emerging. I'm sorry, I didn't know it was emerging. The schools that are emerging. You're welcome. I'm sorry.
where's data points?
So they never start off 13-to-1. Nowhere do we start off at that figure. It happens during the course of the. Right.
Right, unless you had a small pocket of
Right.
students.
The smaller schools have that. Same thing
I emailed it to you.
They might just have
Whether you saved it
35
to it.
children in a grade level, which gives them 2 classes where they don't have 24 in a class,
Maybe we
which
go
is
put it
35
on
children.
a flash drive. They're gonna see that information later.
You want to share with them your data point sheet?
Okay, go ahead.
They have the data point sheet.
You got a copy?
They have the data point sheets.
So also in your packet is, the title of it is 2016-2017 Instructional Staff Planning Process - Data Point. That document has been developed for the last, evolved and modified for the last 3 years now, I would say.
Yeah, it started 3 years ago.
And we share this with all the principals early on in the process. And this kind of sets the guidelines for what we will be explaining to the principals in terms of how we're going to calculate their teacher allocation. on some of these items, we've already kind of addressed it. Again, October 1 is the date that we take these counts. If it's an emerging grade, like their first grade kindergarten, we use a 2-year count from the current year, and last year we take an average. 9th grade, 10th, 11th, and 12th, we actually take 2-year averages. And then the other grades that already were in the system, we just roll them up. So we'll take, if there's 100 kids in first grade this year at Prairie, we'll say 100 kids in second grade next year. Just kind of roll those kids up. Roman numeral 2, A, B, and C talks about the 2+1 and methodology for adding students, adding teachers when there's enough kids. And then when you get to the middle schools, letter D, that's where it gets a little more tricky. Unfortunately for elementary teachers, they don't have what's considered a planning period. They get maybe 30 minutes to walk their kids down to the PE teacher or the band teacher, and sometimes they end up staying with the kids. So elementary teachers really don't get a planning period, but in the middle schools and the high schools, they get a planning period. And we factor that into the calculation for the teacher staffing, so that in middle school, we take a factor of 0.1875. So if there's 1,000 kids and the ratio is 29-1, take 1,000 divided by 29. That gives us a number of teachers. In a middle school, we round up to give them the benefit of the doubt. We take that whole number and multiply it by 0.1875. And that tells us how many teachers we have to hire so that all those middle school teachers can get a planning period. So that adds teachers to the allocation. We do the same thing in the high schools. We do a factor of 0.14. The difference between 0.14 in the high schools and 0.1875 in the middle schools is staff and HR were trying to give additional faculty so that first you accommodated the planning period, but you also accommodated double blocking of English and math. And so we helped out the middle school teachers, principals, gave them extra staff to accommodate double blocking of the 2 cores and the planning period. And we do not do that in the high schools. They rarely double block.
Mr. Craig, would you kindly inform me what double blocking is, please?
Double blocking is, instead of math is probably the classic example. Instead of, you couldn't get all the math done in 40 minutes. Many of the principals have found if you double the period of time they're in math every day, more math practice helps math scores. So instead of 40 minutes of math a day, they're getting 80 minutes of math a day. That's what we call double blocking. It sometimes happens in the high school with the freshmen that are struggling in math, but actually the high school staffing is a little easier, a little more straightforward, and it doesn't impact their schedule as much as it does in middle school.
Yes. Dr. Chasso?
Quick question. Who does the final approval for the appeals? That would be the superintendent, or is there a committee, just strictly you? So question, at what point would we, let's say 130 kids, 5 sections, comes out to 26-1, let's say they really don't anticipate getting that extra kid that they need to get to the 2+1. How prone are we to still grant them? I know we want to give them the help that they need. How are we? Well,
that would depend on the demographics. If a principal said, "Look, I've got I've got X number of students who are reading below level. I have X number of students who are behavior disordered students. If you brought a compelling case that it's unreasonable to expect that you'll get to the trigger mark,
Right.
we would look at an additional teacher if it seems necessary. Sometimes I've used in the past giving that teacher an extra paraprofessional to help in the classroom, depending on the nature of the exceptionalities in there.
Mr. Chasson, in fact, that situation came up just last week. One of the elementary schools has had 4 or 5 students move into the school just since winter, and fortunately it's hard to find a teacher, certified special ed teacher at this time. And Dr. Aguilar, let's get a para in there and give them some relief. So I guess at this time I would, Ms. Samick or Ms. Aloisio could just kind of talk you through, whoever wants to go first, kind of talk you through how a principal would come in and sit with HR, knowing what her numbers are and knowing what HR is calculating them at. So Ms. Samick got up here first. I will put her spreadsheet up. Oops, sorry. Got a different one? I'm sorry. We may not have the most up-to-date version of that on the screen, but Ms. Aloisio is handing you a red folder, and this one would be elementary staffing in an immersion school.
Immersion.
Immersion. This is immersion. You guys are slurring your ears.
Nice to see I have no threats. Well, our parish for this current year is 23-1 at K3. The proposed for the emerging schools will be 20-1. 23 for the emerging schools. Right. 23-1 would be for K3. Fourth would be 25-1, and fifth is 28-1, but that's for your emerging schools. 28-1 fifth grade. Emerging, which is the same for immersion. They're staffed the same. Okay. Right. Yep. This year for emerging schools would lower to 20-1. K3, fourth grade would be 25-1, and fifth grade would be 28-1. Okay, what I wanted to show you is if we took Alice Boucher Elementary School and we took their entire population and we staffed them all the way across, and the handout is probably a little more clear than what I'm showing on the screen. If we staffed them straight across as a school, actually you would say Alice Boucher is 5 teachers overstaffed. And that would be taking from October the 1st, and I also provided you with the data for October 1st in the folder. If you took kindergarten straight across, that would include our immersion students, our non-immersion students, and also a class called Targeted K. They have a total kindergarten population October the 1st of 101 students. If we use the proposed ratio of 20-1 plus the 2 students, so I just divided it by 22, they could have an allocation of 5 kindergarten teachers. However, they currently have 7. And the reason is, as I go through the presentation, when you tease out the non-immersion students and you tease out the immersion students and you tease out the targeted K class, you have a different need in fulfilling the enrollment for each population. So it's almost like scheduling for 2 schools at the same time. So first grade, the entire population for first grade, that's immersion students and non, was 121. So using the proposed 20-to-1 ratio plus the 2 extra students, I just rounded everything up to 22, it becomes that the number crunch is actually 6 teachers. Well, currently they have 7 teachers, and that's the correct allocation for the immersion and non-immersion students. So you can look at the top part of the graph and just see how, looking at it, and if you look at the far right column, you can see the justification that actually they are staffed appropriately when you start looking at the special program that's at the school. So the next column would be the non-immersion grades in your handout. So the non-immersion grades, kindergarten, this year they were staffed at 23-to-1 with the 2 plus, so I just called it 25-to-1. Their enrollment on October the 1st was 47, so it came out that they're staffed at 3 teachers. Taking the kindergarten enrollment this year, last year, taking an average of 50, using the new proposed 20-to-1 plus 2, so let's call it 22-to-1, then you're looking at 3 teachers. So there is no loss or gain of staffing by lowering the pupil-teacher ratio for next year. Again, looking at non-immersion grades, Targeted K is a special kindergarten program to help students get caught up because they're lacking the skills to actually be at the same level as their peers at this time. They have a ratio of approximately 16-to-1. At October 1st, there were 10 students in the class. Last year, there was 14 students in the class at October 1st. So they have an expected ratio of 12-to-1. So when you're asking, do some classes start the school year at a much lower ratio, the answer is yes. That's a special program for that set of children. First grade, October 1st, they had 85 non-immersion students. Taking the kindergarten staff of this year, and it's currently 68, that'll become your new projection for next year's first grade, 68 students, divided by the 22. They barely made the cutoff for 4 teachers. It's like 3 teachers, and then they had the plus 2 students. So that gave them an additional teacher because they went 2 plus 1. So they would actually be staffed at 4 teachers. They're currently staffed at 4 teachers, so there's no gain or loss of staff. Second grade, the enrollment this year was 103. You go back to first grade, 85. That would be the roll-up number. However, currently there's only 81 first graders. So staffing at 81 divided by 22 is 4 teachers. They currently have 5. So they will lose a second grade teacher even though we are lowering the pupil-teacher ratio. Third grade, they currently had, October 1st, they had 81 students. So go back to second grade, they had 103. Those students rolling up to third grade. Currently, there are 98 students in there applying the 22-to-1. They will need 5 teachers. Currently, they have 4. So basically, they're not going to lose a teacher. They're just going to move a teacher from second grade to third grade next year. So I could go through the entire process, but I think you understand the non-immersion. When we go to the immersion students at the bottom, their numbers are smaller. However, we apply the same ratio. So looking at the lottery this year, it's approximately 51 students that have accepted the kindergarten. I heard today it might be 53, so apparently a couple more accepted. But let's say we have 51 students to 22-to-1. is going to make very small classes, but they're going to have 3 Spanish immersion teachers for 51 students. If you only had 2, you would exceed the 22 plus 1 student ratio. So again, you're probably looking at classes of 15, 16, 17 students, depending on who accepts or who drops out during the summer from the lottery. That's an unknown. That's another situation. You staff, and then during the summer, some of the lottery students get that waiting seat for another academy, and then they withdraw and go to another academy. First grade, currently in kindergarten, there are 44 students. We do add students in Spanish immersion at first grade with the lottery, so currently there are at least 49 students scheduled for first grade next year. Again, 49, applying that 22 to 1, barely makes 3 teachers. They currently have 3, so again, there's no gain or loss. And I can go through the whole process, but I believe you understand. Yes, sir.
Yes, Ms. Samick, on these immersion classes,
Yes, sir.
is the enrollment availability, is it in line with the pupil-teacher ratio? So, for example, we have a certain amount of seats available. Is that in line with the 22 to 1 ratio? So 22, 44, 66, 88. We can take 88 students or 66. We can't take 75. We're not going to take 62.
Actually, kindergarten lottery was capped out at 69 because last year was 23 to 1. I don't think we changed it. I think we left it at 69, but as you can see, we only
Was
had
in
51.
line. I mean,
yes, sir.
It was in line with the ratio.
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Centeni?
So my question is, why didn't we just take 2 first graders in the lottery?
2 first graders in the lottery.
Right, well, for next year, right, you said we had 44 in kindergarten this year, and it has +5 for the lottery,
Yes, sir.
which puts us barely over
Right.
for the 3rd teacher. So my question is, why did we take that extra?
There's 2 reasons, well, probably 3. One is they're currently staffed with 3 teachers, so, there's no adding staff, there's no reduction. And all the immersion teachers are basically from a foreign country. And I also put down there how we get a little supplement in that process. Number 2, we're trying to grow the program. So there may be some other students that are on a waiting list first grade. Maybe Jay Wallace James does not get in. They will come because Boucher was their second choice. 3, and the third one is some of the immigrants that are moving in to the area, they're not choosing English as a second language. They do have some foundational skills in English, and actually it is a good fit for them to enter the immersion program.
Oh, I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm not criticizing immersion in the least. I think as a matter of management, right? This is the one area of the school system where we have control over the population, and if we're letting this slip, then we're really not utilizing every tool to our advantage. Is the point I was trying to make?
Yes, sir.
The projected enrollment for kindergarten of 51 in the lottery, will there be a waiting list?
There could be, but there is not a waiting list. It could go up to 69. So anyone that is on a waiting list for another academy that doesn't get in, they could come over automatically if Boucher was their second choice.
Okay. And I know this isn't you guys' baby to bear because you haven't handled this before. Have we had a waiting list even into the school year for, let's say, kindergarten Spanish immersion? For instance, when this year got started, kindergarten is now rolling. Was there still a waiting list of kids waiting to get in?
Last year, we added a section of kindergarten, Nicole, because we were at capacity. So we did open another section to grow the program.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not growing exponentially like we would hope to fill all the seats.
Right, but was there a waiting list still?
Nicole?
for kindergarten this year? Was there a waiting list?
Well, last year we were not under this allocation that we were looking at this year. So we were limiting the number of students at Boucher at 18, I want to say, or whatever the ratio was for Boucher. So we were not at 69. This year we put it at 69 like the rest of the immersion programs. Traditionally, I'm going to say that every year the only school that has a lottery is Prairie, but most of my schools filled to capacity by July.
Okay. Let me try it again. Everybody's missing my question. Is there or was there still a waiting list? This year my son started kindergarten.
Yes,
He's in
sir.
Spanish immersion. A month into the school year, was there still a list of kids on the waiting list?
That's something I work on all August. I monitor the number of students in each section, and if there's an opening, I go through the waiting list. Unfortunately, at that time, even though we have a waiting list, a lot of parents hesitate to move their child who have started in a new school, a new teacher, and so we have a lot of people declining. But I place students throughout the year. If I have an opening and I have a candidate, I place that candidate.
No, sir, there was not.
Okay, fourth time.
No, sir,
Was
there
there
was not.
a waiting list? Come on, guys, it's not
No,
hard. I'm
Alice
not trying to
Boucher
be.
Kindergarten did not have a waiting list. Every child that applied to in the lottery to be in there was admitted. Yes, sir.
So we were supposed to be at 23-1. I understand what Justin's getting at. Either cap it so you don't add that extra teacher, but I do understand the extra teacher doesn't cost us as much. But so factually, June, July, August, waiting list. There was all those kids got in. There was 0 kids waiting to get into Spanish immersion, hoping for a phone call even before the school year would start. And people are reluctant to change their kids over to actually raise those numbers to, I guess, so we can get more benefit for our buck as far as getting it to 22-1 or 23-1. So no, the answer is no.
To the best of my knowledge, no. Every child got in, and there was not a waiting list for kindergarten Spanish immersion this summer.
Okay, so first grade.
Some may have waited to see if they were getting in another academy before accepting, but not a waiting list like we had filled all our seats. Now you have to wait for someone to leave, like pre-K.
Right. Well, Ms. Sandberg, respectfully, a waiting list is a waiting list. We don't know what the parents are doing. It's not like
Correct.
you get them on the phone and they share with us, well, hey, I'm waiting, and if I don't get in, then I get. So there was a waiting list. Yes.
Yes.
One solid answer, guys. Just one. One. Just one.
I'm
Just one.
sorry.
No, I understand it, and
It's-
I'm not trying to seem aggravated with it. I just a real simple question. I'm just trying to max out. I understand. Both of my kids have been in immersion. These kids have been in classes with 13 kids, 14 kids, and it's amazing. It's a private school within a public school setting. It's amazing. But at the same time, if we can get to 22-1 or 23-1 in those classes to maximize and yet still not have kids on the waiting list. So
And I
That's
apologize
okay,
because I
guys.
know it's confusing.
Yeah, that's
but
okay. Don't worry about it,
I do have
Ms.
a
Boudreaux.
waiting list, and I wish Barbara was there. We do have a waiting list throughout the summer. It's
Right.
just that we fill it up when we know somebody, we finally find out this
Right.
person is not coming in.
I understand.
But by the middle of August, usually we have exhausted the waiting list.
Okay. So the answer is yes.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Santilli.
Dr. Chasson, are you done? Okay. All right. So the next question is going to be, I don't know how we go through the application process, whether we look at the applications first or what we do, but shouldn't we know in December how many people have Boucher as their first choice?
We do, but
Do we
do.
open seats based on that number?
We have a number of open seats before the lottery. On the 31st of January, the lottery closed. People cannot apply anymore. Then we have the lottery, and then applications are reopened, and people apply, and they are accepted on first come, first base.
Right, but what I'm saying is, so the 51 that have already accepted for Boucher next year. I hope people from Boucher don't think we're picking on them, but that's just the numbers that are in front of us. The 51 that have already accepted at Boucher next year, did 58 have Boucher as their first choice? Or were 42 as their first choice, and then we caught 9 who didn't get into James?
Actually, if they are accepted in their second choice and they accept that slot, they lose their spot in the other choice.
No, I get that, but that's not my question. My question is, if we knew that we had 46, or let's just say we had 43 people who had Boucher as their first choice, then we really have no reasonable expectation that we're ever going to get to 69, right?
Oh, yes,
but
we do.
We're going to pick up an extra 27 students
yes,
who
we
don't have
do.
Boucher as their first choice. They're at 51 right now. I mean, we're going to get 18 between
yes.
now and August?
I've seen years where I got more than half of the students in July and August.
At Boucher?
A lot of
Again, we're not
people
picking on Boucher. It's a growing
traditionally-
program. But we're trying to grow it. But my
yeah.
point is to have some reasonable expectation of what the number of seats are. And if we feel like we're going to get to 60, yeah, let's open the other section. But if we're going to get to 51, then I mean, it's not.
I wish I could answer that in 2 weeks.
Sure.
Because I think that's April 15th is the deadline for people who have received an acceptance letter to turn back their own acceptance. So at that point, we are a lot more certain of the numbers. And then I could give you an answer at that point.
Okay.
But traditionally, yes, I pick up a good bit of applications. We get applications every day right now.
Thank you, Ms. Boudreaux.
Whichever one you want.
So I do have one other question on
Okay,
a different
go ahead.
different
Go
topic.
ahead, Mr. Centenni.
So what was? Wait, don't leave that one yet. Well, you go right ahead. Then I'll say.
So for kindergarten, last year we were 23 to 1. We're
Yes,
going
sir.
to 22. So 69 students, but we have 51 now in kindergarten, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I would tend to think, and I'm not being condescending. This is me just being honest. I would tend to think that if we inform the public or parents in general that, hey, listen, if you're interested in your kid being in Spanish immersion, we have 18 more available slots. Then we could have filled those classrooms
That we're paying for.
that we're already paying for, still be underneath the ratio of 23 to 1, and yet at the same time lessen the burden on other schools, because those kids wouldn't be in kindergarten somewhere else. They would be here. But I know for a fact, because I've been to parent day and when you're in there and you're like, wow, this is amazing. My kid is in a class with so little children. And it offers an amazing learning experience that my children have benefited from. But at the same time, my job as a parent is separate from my job as a school board member. So can we somehow figure out a way that if we're going to do, let's say 22 to 1, and we've got 3 teachers, and if we're going to take that 66 magic number, what is that number now from the papers actually off of our screen right now? What is that number now? Because we don't have it in this packet, I don't think. I saw the Alamo, but I didn't see.
You mean who accepted already?
Yeah.
51
51.
for
So-
kindergarten next year.
For kindergarten next year. So if we've got 15 slots, I mean, can we try and fill those up? And I understand when we say try and someone will tell you, yeah. And then you can go look at the school next year when I'm there and he's in first grade and I look at the kindergarten class and there's 15 kids in there. But can we, if we just put it out there,
Absolutely.
there's 15 more slots, guys, or this waiting list that either is a yes or a no, I mean, exhaust that out so we can either get our money's worth yet still offer a great education for these kids, or do what Mr. Centennial was basically alluding to, that don't go over if we're only going to get so many more kids over that magic number.
You have another question?
Yeah, and it's on something different. So what is the? I thought it was somewhere else. What is the cost of going down from on the ratio at the D schools for next year? On the proposed, I guess. So as we just saw, none of the cost is coming from Boucher.
So, Mr. Centani, it looks like it says the ratio of 20 to 1 shall apply to staffing for the D level elementary schools, and will add 4 teachers, $268,000. 4 teachers for elementary, and to go to 26 to 1 at the middle and high schools will add 7 teachers, a cost of $469,000.
Okay, that's the number I was looking for.
And just a quick comment to the board. We will conduct more advertising this summer, and we will definitely identify programs that are underfilled so that we can attract more children to take advantage of those seats.
Do we do any kind of campaign to the people who actually applied or have applied in the past to the schools of choice, and we have parents who are interested in special programs? Do we?
Yes.
Not just the people who listed Boucher, but like maybe somebody put Prairie French Immersion down and didn't get in, and like, hey, would you like to do Spanish? We see you're interested in that kind of thing.
Mr. Centani, I assure you, we're going to try to fill those seats. We've got a lot of people interested in our programs, our schools of choice. We're going to definitely try to offer them something, maybe not their first or second choice, but maybe we can attract them to another program.
I'll just say thank y'all for putting up with these questions and answering them. I certainly hope nobody feels like it was an inquisition or anything like that, but I think the point is we realize that we're paying for seats that we're not using, not just in the schools of choice, but all across the parish, because we're staffing at 24 to 1, and it's well under that in several schools. So,
Mr. Centani, just to be transparent about this, we grabbed those numbers that you're seeing on that table in March, well after the October 1 count when staffing occurred. That's probably why you're seeing smaller class sizes in March rather than October.
Let me just remind y'all, we have 10 minutes
Green.
before the regularly scheduled 5:30 meeting, and we still have to talk about schedule, so let's kind of.
Mine will
Keep that in
take like
mind.
1 minute, 2 minutes at the most. If you go to the Alamo one, that's the one I'm most familiar with. And I'm not going to go through every single one. But if you look at Alamo as a middle school, the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, all 3 of those classes are 29 to 1. And just to show you how the factor worked, you divide by 29, and you got the 11 in 6th grade, 11.3 sections, which gave you 12 teachers. You multiplied by the factor 0.1875, which gave you 2.25, which gave you 2. We didn't round up. It stayed at 2. So actually it gave us 14 teachers for 6th grade. And that's the factor that Mr. Craig has been talking about. Same thing for 7th, same thing for 8th. And so at the end of the day, for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade right now, if the numbers hold, they would get 41 teachers at Alamo. If you go to turn your page to Green Tea Linden. You want to change it or no? You have it in front of you right there. I don't know where you have it. Okay, if you look at Green Tea Linden, it's the elementary K through 3 are 24 to 1, and it's a strict division. There's no factor, and you just divide and multiply. 4th grade is 26 to 1, and so that's how you get the teachers, and you can just add them up. There's no extra there. And the last one was the 5th grade staffing at Alamo, because 5th grade is 29 to 1, but here again there's no factor. So I wanted you to show K through 8 and how the teachers are determined, and it's just a flat division for K through 5. Any questions? That was pretty fast. You're welcome.
So in the interest of time, I'm going to be even less time than Miss Aloisio. As I said earlier, the high schools are very straightforward. You just clump all the grades together, or all the regular students together, divide by 29-1. If that's the ratio, it gives you a number of teachers. What you just received is probably the document that would be of most interest to you. We have worked closely with Human Resources this past month, and there's several pages. The first two pages are K through 3 elementary schools. And if you look at the columns, it'll say what you're currently being staffed at, what we're projecting for 16-17. On the far right, you will see red, as in a teacher needs to be cut, or you'll see green, as in a teacher needs to be added. This is Human Resources projections that we've worked on the past couple of months. We're releasing it to you today, and the principals, this is the document we're talking about, where we'll call the principals in and we'll share numbers and have a discussion about, is this true? Is this low? Is this high? So the first two pages were K through 3 elementary. Then there is a document that is K through 4th. If you look in the very lower left-hand corner, you'll see 4th grade. So that's all the schools that have a 4th grade. Again, the first 4 columns are what they're currently staffed at. The next set of columns is what we're projecting for 16-17. Red would be a potential cut. Green would be an addition. There's a document in the lower left-hand corner. It's 5th grade, so that would be 5th grade staffing. Remember, it's a slightly higher ratio, even in the emerging schools. Set up the same way. The first 4 columns, the ones on the left are current staffing. The ones on the right are expected proposed staffing. Then there's a document 6 through 8, that is middle school staffing. And the last page would be high school staffing. It is a lot of information, I understand. I would turn it back over to Mr. Angel for...
Well, the next item on our agenda is a review of the school master schedule. That's what you just showed us? Okay. That's it? Any questions or comments? We'll adjourn the workshop and give us a 4 or 5 minute break.